everything's about you. I'm to blame. It's me. I'm the problem. Everything's about me, to around 11 where it's like, actually, you're the problem. And then it's nothing about us. It's everything is because of them and what they did. And, and it's this. So I took all of that judgment that I had about myself, the unworthy of love, not being chosen, difficult to love. I had all these different beliefs. And then I just
threw it at
projected that all over her. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. And today, back with me again is my partner in life and business, Kent McKean. And we're going to be talking about a topic that I think has affected more people today than ever before, and that is estrangement. So welcome.
Thanks. Yeah. Estrangement. What does that even mean?
That's a good question. I did not even look that up. I usually like to look up words in the dictionary.
So other than textbook definitions of estrangement,
right.
We're talking about estrangement and the idea of like when to cut ties with someone relationally, things like that. But tell me maybe from your perspective, or at least your experience, what estrangement is from your standpoint.
Right. So I think that it's one of those sort of buzz phrases these days, a little bit hand in hand with all the, trauma talk and stuff that's happening, which is moreover a good thing, I think. But, it always comes with some interesting little alleyways and side topics. But estrangement, for our intents and purposes, is talking about really putting strong boundaries around a relationship in such that you don't have a physical relationship with that person any longer. So you don't really talk, you don't see each other, that would be my version of estrangement, that those, in one sense, those ties have been cut in the now, in this world, which I know is going to sound super weird, but I'll sort of get into that as I explain my own experience with this.
Yeah, so obviously one of the main reasons that we're talking about this is not only because it's a buzzword, not only because we're talking about trauma and all these other things, but there's been estrangement in your own life. And so maybe you could just share a little bit with the audience, those who haven't heard or haven't read your book or anything like that. Explain a little bit about the estrangement that you've experienced.
Yeah, so it's funny too. I don't know that I even would have had the language around that until maybe the last few years. But I've spoken about it many times before, but and the word feels a little still doesn't fit exactly right in my feeling anyway.
Okay, before you continue, what is the word that feels exactly right when you think about your own life and the relationships and the things that you've really gone through, especially in the last number of years?
Yeah. Being a wordy type of person, I don't know that there is. Maybe someone out there is from another culture and has a word that fits this, even though I don't actually think that that's probably going to be the case, because a lot of other cultures don't really engage in estrangement with a family member.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole other story. It is more of a Western mindset. It is a recent mindset, but maybe there is a word out there. I think that it's the word that doesn't fully fit, because I've heard so many other people's experience with estrangement, obviously run in a lot of therapy circles. I've heard a lot of talk from those different angles. And I think for me, it just feels a little different. And maybe it does for everybody. I haven't heard everybody's story, but I think for me, it wasn't something that came out of a place of fear, anger, resentment, or anything like that. It was more of to me, this is an act of love.
Okay, so similar, and we've talked about boundaries some in a past episode, but similar to the way that maybe our Western world thinks about boundaries is like, I'm doing this because and it's more coming from a place of fear or insecurity or shutting someone out because of, this idea. Estrangement may feel as a word similar to the way that the Western world kind of uses it rather than maybe the way that we'll talk about it today.
Yeah, very possibly. And I don't think we've actually done our boundary
Have we
episode
not?
yet. I know.
It's up here.
I know. Well, that being said, yes. So for me, and I know that might sound strange to hear for somebody, is that estrangement is an act of love. I think even and I want to recognize that there will be people listening that are on the other side of the estrangement. In fact, I've had numerous clients over the years, and increasingly so, where they are on the other side of that equation. They're the one that has been cut out, so to speak. And so that's actually brought a lot of interesting perspective, I think, to my case. But I think that also is why sometimes it doesn't always feel like it fits. So, some of the things that I've heard around estrangement is this idea of, someone's toxic.
Right.
And because someone's toxic, you need to cut them out of your life, right? So their toxic behaviors or them just being a toxic person, and if you don't cut them out of your life, then you're somehow contributing to or partaking in this toxicity.
Or it will leak into you or into your life or things like that.
Something like that is a bit of the generalized idea that I get. And listen, there's truth to that, right? The company that we keep often does have a profound impact on us. I think it's actually a reflection of us is the company that we keep. And so I think that there's some really good feedback that could happen in there if you find yourself in lots of situations where you've had to cut ties with people. And I will say that is a result of a natural leveling up very often, is that not necessarily that we have to cut ties, but that we will no longer resonate on an energetic level with maybe our current company.
When we're evolving, our relationships evolve as well, sometimes with those people and sometimes evolving out of those current relationships into more evolved relationships.
Right. So I see a bit of a difference in, you hear in some of the circles around this type of self-improvement, personal empowerment about, cutting people out of your life and, people that are going to hold you back and keep you down, and that you need to, cut them out and move on and move up. And I think that there's the motivation behind that is going to come with you.
Right.
Right. There's that's sort of a negative push.
It's the whole driver situation. What is driving us to expand and create different or new relationships versus what is driving me to, well, I need to get away because X, Y, and Z. Right. And then we're going to land in a similar situation.
And it goes back down to one of the tenets of mind change, which is the victim-victor.
Right.
Which is like, if you can't level up because of the people around you, then that's victimization. That's that these people are keeping me in this place.
So if we're blaming the relationships for the people around us, and then we're not somewhere we want to be because of these people, we have outsourced the power to become whatever we want.
Right. What I've found in the leveling up sort of trajectory is that relationships sort of naturally fall apart, or not fall apart in a negative way, but sort of fall off and
start to dissolve.
Yeah, they just don't really like those. I haven't found in my experience that I've needed to cut ties with tons of different people and make hardcore boundary lines around who I hang out with and what people are in my circle. And there's a little bit of that talk out there. And when you hear it, it's just, there's an edge to it, is from my perspective. And I think, okay, that really pulls us back into the victim mentality. What I think is a more victor mentality is that when we begin to work on ourselves, and that's always going to be the first thing, right? Like, it's not like you can, I'll cut everybody out who's making me this way, and then I'm going to be good and we'll be able to start, evolving in this way or actualizing. Where an environment does play a part and does have a role in this. But I would say it's so much more about understanding our worth and our value, and that it becomes that we don't really resonate with certain things in our environment any longer. And we don't feel as comfortable in the norm. And so what was our norm at the time? And so we tend to start just having different habits, like let's say you're in a partying kind of culture and, like everyone drinks and smokes and parties, and that's like the use of your free time. And you start to want to level up and evolve. You start to realize maybe my body isn't feeling that great, or weird things happen when we're all out partying, and the relationships are a little bit messed up. So you might think, okay, I need to just cut out all my partying friends and just cold turkey and then just be out there. And listen, that's an option for some people. But I think a more sustainable way of doing that would be to start doing the work on yourself. What is that? What is that possible need or desire to want to go out and live this way? And maybe once you start to figure out your worth and your value, you start to value your sleep and your body and your exercise and what you put in your body. And you start to no, you're not going to be out partying all night long when you want to have a reasonable bedtime, because you're going to get up in the morning and exercise, or go for a walk, or meditate, or stretch, or spend time with people, or study, or read, or something like that. You just start to make these different decisions based on you.
And if you're wanting to have in-depth relationships, maybe those were like fun, whatever, kind of on the surface relationships, doing your thing, talking the talk. But if you're starting to level up within yourself and wanting that deeper connection, that deeper intimacy, wanting that kind of depth in friendship, something's going to shift.
Right. Now, if you then these people, they're shallow and they're right. You're
start judging.
Yeah. Which a lot of people will do. That's what they will settle for, rather than getting inside and creating and unlayering all of the worth and the value. So we will judge. And this is where you just get people burning bridges. Let me tell you, this was me. Any of those people back in my life, my former life, friends, I did this in high school. Oh my goodness, I did this in high school terribly. It was out of complete insecurity, complete fear. And I kept thinking I don't want to be like these small town people, and it was just my own insecurity and my own stuff and just drinking and the partying and all that, where I just went into my next group of friends and next layer doing the same thing. Really, I took me with me and ended up with the same situation. So I did this a lot previous to being able to understand what made me tick and all the different things that contributed to the way I felt about myself then. But I think that's what I see sometimes people doing and calling that growth or personal development.
You might change the behaviors, change your surroundings, but like we always say, wherever you go, there you are. You're going to show up at some point.
Right. So really, though, I will say very naturally, when you start exercising and, valuing yourself and figuring out what you consume, not just in your mouth, but in your mind, and, those different things, there will be this disparity, right? There will start to be this natural gap. And this is that place of uncomfortability that sometimes people have a really hard time with, because there's a lot of judgment that typically comes. Maybe you're not judging this group of friends that served a real purpose for you. We're real friends at the time because they were friendly and friends to you in the state that you were in at that particular time of your life. Either maybe you're not judging them, but out of their insecurity and sometimes it's even just envy, jealousy, sometimes watching someone else move up and out of these circumstances creates an enormous amount of insecurity in them because they think, well, good for you, I can't do the same thing. So rather than deal with that idea and where that comes from, they'll judge others, right? So there's a lot of judgment that tends to happen in this, so that's that uncomfortability, where then sometimes people make a lot of effort to keep people in their lives that, frankly, it's not going to work anymore. It's just not going to work. Not because either one of you are not good people, not because one of you is making a good life choice and the other one is not making a good life choice, right? There's judgment there. But because you guys are just really vibrating at completely different frequencies, and I don't mean that in a woo-woo sense. I really mean that if we were to measure the energetic fields, your vibrations, the things that are coming out of you because of how you're utilizing your energy in your body, it would look different.
Sure.
You'd emit different colors, you'd emit different frequencies. And when those are mismatched, then that creates tension. It's meant to move those forces apart. And if we don't know that and we want to put a lot of judgment around that causes a lot of pain.
Okay, so this whole idea of judgment of like, oh, I don't want to be around these people, so I'm going to remove myself, right? That's the one thing. What about people who say, wow, like this surrounding my environment, my community, whatever, isn't really serving where I'm going anymore. And then they're like, well, I just want to be around these people and these people and these people. I want to be around this wealth. I want to be around this entrepreneur. Right? So is there a similarity between a judgment of like, I don't want to be around these people because versus bad partying, whatever, versus, well, I just want to be around these people because that's where I want to be. Do you see what I'm saying? Where it's like, there's a little bit of a fine line of I'm cutting myself off judgment because they're bad versus, well, I'm cutting myself off because I'm going to attain.
Yeah, again, I think it really comes to the drivers. What's the underlying force there? And we obviously, through the work we do, we could get to that and sort of uncover that. I think there's health in looking for around you for what you want.
Sure.
Because that's a huge part of creation, is you must be able to visualize it or feel into it to be able to create it. So finding other people who in your perception have attained something that you would like to attain is just good. It's just good human practice, right? It's how we learn to do things. But if it's the judgment really that always gets in the way. So if we're judging that these people are inferior and these people are superior, let me tell you, you're not really energetically vibrating at a level that is going to make you comfortable in either place.
Right, because ultimately the judgment's coming from where I have been or where I'm not or whatever.
I do think that that's a little bit kind of circling back to this whole idea of cutting ties with people and estrangement. I do think that's the common culture around this, is they think, like, if someone were to hear that I'm estranged from my mother.
Right. I definitely want to get into that in a moment.
Right. They may, who knows? I couldn't say what their perception of that would be because you don't know their personal experience. But some perceptions could be like, oh, she must be terrible. She must be a horrible person. Or she must have done really bad things to you. Or on the other side, some people are like, oh, you're a snowflake. You're one of those people. You're too weak to handle it. Or, oh, you're bitter. You're unforgiving. Mm-hmm. You're just not willing to.
You don't want to deal.
Right. Like various forms, people will, again, it's the judgment, will judge that idea of around what estrangement is. And so for me, I want to kind of, draw that line and say, I did not make this decision. First of all, did not make it lightly, did not make it rashly, did not make it because someone told me that I, was dealing with a narcissist and all these various things, and that I needed to cut ties. This was something that developed over time within me as I found my value and my worth. And, this is what happened. It is not necessarily, are there toxic behaviors? Absolutely. I'm sure she could say the same thing about me, right? Certain things about toxic behaviors. But it is more of, to circle back, it is an act of love that this particular estrangement exists.
So then why don't you kind of fill us in? How did this estrangement with your mom happen? And I'll ask some other questions about it as well. But just in general, give us the brief overview of the estrangement with your mom, because this is obviously hitting right at home.
Right. Okay. So I think in case someone doesn't know my story, just to sort of sum up, and it's difficult because I don't resonate, like it doesn't really feel super real to me anymore. So because of all the work that I've done.
All the past issues and problems, not just with mom, but with life, right? It's all kind of a story.
I used to be like, oh, my traumatic childhood, that was such a powerful story for me. Doesn't mean there wasn't trauma in my childhood, but it doesn't feel very defining to me anymore.
Okay.
But that being said, my parents divorced when I was 4. And even before that, this was the 70s. It was a very small town. There was a lot of trauma coming from both sides. Very different.
Both sides of mom's family, dad's family.
Mom's side and dad's side. So dad's side being more emotional abuse, emotional neglect, which they all thought was fairly normal to some degree, right? Like a really harsh, authoritarian patriarch.
It was normal for them.
In his father, right? But not necessarily poor. There wasn't a lot of poverty, even though there's a big poverty mindset that comes somewhere there generationally. But that wasn't really the lived experience. Where on my mother's side, there was a lot more like wrong side of the tracks kind of idea, and a lot of just big T trauma, a lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse. So a lot of stuff coming up, not just generationally, but very, very lived experience for my mom. And
substance abuse.
Yeah, and then substance abuse, big time. Now, substance abuse as more of a coping around the trauma, big T trauma on my mom's side. So my grandfather was a alcoholic, died of alcoholism. So there was a lot of that in that side of the family. Where on my dad's side, there was substance abuse as well, but not so much from an addictive.
Mm-hmm. More recreational. Again, coping, I believe. Coping with very difficult life circumstances. So you bring that together, and they have a whole story, and who knows, you hear it over the time, and they have a whole story of how they came together. But there was a lot of partying, there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of stuff going, a lot of physical fights. These were just two very, very hurt young people. My mom had me at 19, coming together and just dealing with a lot of shared trauma. So I know that now. And I don't say that as a matter of excuse for what happened. It's just fact of the matter. It just is. Sure.
So once they divorced, my mom moved. We took my little brother and I and moved. And that started many different moves, a lot of poverty situations, a lot of not having enough money for food, for places to live, for safety, various things like that. But really, I do believe she was doing the best she could. And then there was a lot of men and, different situations there. And I think that, so over that time, then she remarried a man who was also an addict, was a severe addict, alcoholic and drug addict, and was also very physically abusive. So very quickly after they got married, the physical abuse started, not just toward her, but toward my brother and I, and that escalated significantly. So there was a lot of physical abuse and a lot of other stuff happening at the time. So the thing about that's interesting, though, was I had a very codependent relationship with my mom, meaning somehow at probably age 4, when they divorced, I got the idea that she was somehow my responsibility to help. I saw her struggle so much, and I thought that I could help. And also
from a little 4-year-old perspective.
4-year-old, right. Like, and these are things that you don't think kids do, make these decisions.
They're subconscious beliefs that then are held on to and create all sorts of interesting things throughout the rest of that person's life, right? And
it's not like someone knew that and didn't do anything about it. Like, you don't know that a 4-year-old has decided that their mother is now their responsibility. I would have not been able to vocalize that or say that. I also then in my mind, I think especially when the stepfather turned out to be so physically abusive and he turned into, in my mind, a threat, that just sort of upped the ante. And I, of course, thought, listen, when you're little, your parents, and this is not just a nice thing, this is the brain development. Your parents are your world. You literally rely on them for survival. And because of that, it is virtually impossible to see that they would do any wrong. Now, I may at this age be able to look back and be like, that was not okay to do to a 4-year-old or to a 5-year-old, but that's retroactive. That's me now putting judgment and putting, reflection and perspective and more of an adult way of thinking onto that situation. But at that age, didn't have it. You just don't have the brain hardware for it. So when negative things happen, very often children, almost always, they are internalizing that. They are figuring out how they are responsible for that.
Well, and for a child, everything is ego in one sense, right? Everything reflects back to me.
Everything's about me.
It's my fault, or it's my responsibility, or I did something. That's why so many parents get divorced. They're like, what did I do? It's just natural for a child to take on responsibility of everything.
Right. And when your primary caregiver is in threat of death, in a life-threatening situation, that disrupts first of all, it disrupts your nervous system. That's just a given. If we're talking about anything somatic here, that's just puts your nervous system completely out of whack. You're not supposed to be worrying about the survival of your primary caregiver as a child. But when you do, that really messes your world up. So as far as safety, as far as anything goes, everything becomes survival. And so really so young, I was deeply codependent on my mom. I would have said she was my everything, my absolute everything. All that I could really think of, all that I could, I just loved her so hard and so big. Like,
even when you left home at 11, even when you came back during high school, even when there was all of these different things or ups and downs and drugs and alcohol and all of this, there was still this like deep-seated love, protection, wanting to,
Yeah, because I really wanted to protect her. I saw her as more, it's that role reversal, right? I saw her more as the childlike figure that needed protection, needed someone to be there for her.
Again, nothing she asked for. It's just the things that you took on.
Right. And I know even in her state, she would have been mortified.
Right.
And she probably did. That probably did register. She probably did see that in me to some degree, probably didn't have the words for it. But I think that created something that I'll talk about a little bit later, but this guilt and this shame. So she already did a lot of shame from her childhood. She had a very rough, we're talking capital T trauma over and over and over and over again, right? And so I think there was already a lot of guilt and shame. And then she had kiddos, and there was all these ways that, I think she felt like she wasn't doing a good job, wasn't providing, wasn't doing all of these various things. She gets involved with this guy. So my mom also was an addict. She had an issue with alcohol, but then it escalated into drugs. Found cocaine paraphernalia when I was about 10. So I know that there was a lot of, they would disappear for many, many days at a time, leaving us home alone. Which we're talking about the very early 80s, and that wasn't terribly weird.
Especially for where you lived and the socioeconomic status and all these other things.
I mean, we were feral children. Everybody was feral, I feel like, in the 80s. That's the latchkey kids. We were relatively on our own. And I will say, I'm only now able to reflect back on this. But I had a crazy fun childhood. I did all sorts of wackadoodle things that, now I feel like we're probably near-death experiences, but it's a lot of fun. We had a ton of fun. But on the other side of that, there was a lot of stuff happening with my mom. So like you mentioned, I say I left home at 11. And so here's the mindset behind that was my stepfather had, at this point he was in jail because he had perpetrated against us numerous times. And there was an incident with a knife where he came in, and there was all of these things. And so very much like he was dangerous, and he was a threat to our life. And so he was put in jail. And then the whole knife incident was that he somehow got out of jail and then broke through, of course, numerous restraining orders and everything, came and did this thing. And so from that point, then he goes back to jail. And I'm thinking that, okay, now she's going to leave him. So this is the whole thing, this whole back and forth. And I've talked about this before, but what this did to me was put me in this position of feeling like I wanted to be the recipient of her love and affection. And it's not like she didn't love me or give me affection at times.
No, but from your perception as a child with all of this stuff going on.
Right. I thought she preferred the stepfather or various other men after that, and drugs to me. Right. So when you're in a survival mindset and in a poverty or lack mentality, everything is me versus them. You've got to get what you can. It's very so much lack. And so we lacked food, we lacked electricity, we lacked safety, we lacked, all these various things. And then I lacked that knowledge that I was chosen, that I could be the one that was chosen. And so that made me feel something about me. I wasn't doing a good enough job. Had I been doing a better job somehow, whatever that meant, taking care of my brother, taking care of her, I kept thinking if I could do a better job taking care of her, then she would choose me over drugs, over the stepfather. So he's in prison or jail or however that goes. And she's like, again, I'm going to leave him. I'm going to leave him. And I'm making these decisions at 11. And I thought, okay, if I leave, if I go and show her that we can get away, that it can be done, if an 11-year-old can do it, she'll come and follow me.
So you were, in one sense, you would never have said this at the time, but creating an estrangement or a cutting ties with the stepfather, hoping you were trying to, in one sense, allow for mom to do what you were trying to do at that time, follow in your steps.
Well, even deeper, which I did not realize until I was in my late 30s and doing the work, doing this work, was I was creating an ultimatum. And it was an ultimatum of if she really loves me, she'll follow me. And now it's a really unfair thing to do, but I was 11. Now, interesting things start to happen in your brain around the age of 11, especially if you're a female. And that is this this idea of autonomy that starts to happen. So I was like right in alignment with this development idea. And so I did that. I was like, okay, I'm going to move. I'm going to move out of the house at 11. And it was not like I ran away from home. It was all very planned and supported. I was going to leave. I was going to move to live with family members, wherever that was. So the first place I stopped was Texas, and then I went to Louisiana and then Virginia. So I bounced around with various family members at the time, all to get her to leave. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if I go, she'll follow because she loves me that much. She won't be able to live without me. Not conscious that I was making that decision at 11, but that's really what I was doing. And she didn't follow. She didn't leave. And so that set an idea, a belief in my mind that I wasn't worthy of being pursued. And that I crashed like hardcore there as I'm moving around with various family members, and I was very depressed, very suicidal. Here I am, 12 years old. I'm living with family, and my family, it was all my mom's extended family, aunts and uncles and various things. They were so great to take me in. I'm this like ragtag, little child that it was way too big for my britches, like thought I knew everything about what the world was, but also deeply pining for the love of my mom, and also worried about her life. Literally worried about her life and the life of my little brother on a daily basis, because that was a real deal. Like he tried to, kill us multiple times. So I thought, and I didn't have much faith in the system because he was supposed to be in jail when the major attack on us happened with the knife and everything. So I was like, there's no way to keep her safe. So
you made a lot of belief systems around mom and things like that at 11, 12. And I would assume, you tell me, and of course this is all third party, but probably some belief systems were created inside of mom when you left with this.
Yeah, maybe. I don't really know. Honestly, I think, here's the thing. Her version of history is vastly different. And I think that is something that bothered me to no end up until, really I started doing the work, was that I felt like she was invalidating what happened, or she was denying what happened. She would deny the abuse. She would deny, and I see that now as a total protective mechanism for her. Like, how can you really admit to yourself and take in that you're putting yourself and your children's lives in danger, like over and over and over again? So I think for her, it was a coping mechanism, this denial. And so I'm not sure. What I do know happened is I eventually moved with my grandmother back to Nebraska, my mom's mother, and she kind of stitched me back together. I think a little bit of the maternal love that I had been missing, she sort of patchworked all of that back together. And then at 13, so this is 2 years that I went without living with my mom, then she finally left him and then also moved in with her mom. So all of a sudden, she's coming back and living with her mom, and my brother is coming back too. And I'm like, so a lot happened in that time where all of that codependency turned to anger, because I really felt like she had made her decision and that I was not worthy of the love, right? I know it sounds silly to look back and think of that, but really those were my options at the time. And so there was a lot of conflict, a lot of kind of drama in that time. But that being said, I would say I was very, 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 very close to my mom.
So it wasn't that you just, even though you're talking about all these difficult situations and all of these things, you wouldn't necessarily say, given the again, we're going to get there, but given the estrangement, the current estrangement, you wouldn't say that, oh, my life with my mom was just always so difficult. The relationship was always so difficult.
No, I think that there was so much closeness, but it was totally dysfunctional. It was completely codependent.
Okay.
So this codependency, right, is this idea. It's where you blend we were deeply enmeshed. So there wasn't healthy autonomy or healthy boundaries. That I'd never even heard of that word until I was way well into my adulthood.
Even though there were periods of time where you were not together, there still wasn't an autonomy in one sense, a healthy
not
autonomy.
at all. There was no me without her.
Okay.
That's what enmeshment does. So that's why when there was that physical separation, I was lost. I was completely lost. I didn't know how to exist without living for her.
Okay.
And so, obviously, now listen, I was 11, 12. I know now how unfair that is, to put on a parent, especially such an emotionally unhealthy parent, because she was just really a child trying to raise children. And that's not a dig on her emotional capability. It's just she was carrying so much unresolved trauma. So I think that's the interesting thing is I can't look back and be like, oh, I never got along with my mom. We always were like distant and we never really clicked or anything. No, I lived for her. I would have laid down, stepped in front of a bullet, laid down in front of a train. I would have done 100 times over at any point because she was my everything. I couldn't really see life without her. If she was doing well, life was good. If she was not doing well, that is all I could ever think about or focus on. So we ended up, my mom bought a house or rented a house at that point in a town about 30 miles away from my grandma. And we started living together as a family again. And there was so much conflict because at this point, there was always a role reversal with us. I was always more the caretaker. But at this point, I became a very authoritarian parent to her. And she was, again, a single mom, trying to build up and work and do all of these different things while also in very active addiction. And so I shamed her, blamed her, parented her, punished her. I mean, this was like the majority of my high school years were spent in this dance of trying to shame her into being a better parent, trying to control her into being the mother that I thought she should be, right? So I guess, in that sense, it makes a lot of sense how that shaped our relationship.
So first you took on the blame in one sense of like, what's wrong with me that she's not loving me? And then you said, I'm going to make these decisions and create an ultimatum. And then it created anger. And then you kind of came back together. And with that shame, anger, judgment you had within yourself, it was kind of creating that relationship that you then had in high school with her.
Yeah, and going kind of along with general brain development. It's like everything's about you. I'm to blame. It's me. I'm the problem. Everything's about me, to around 11 where it's like, actually, you're the problem. And then it's nothing about us. It's everything is because of them and what they did. And, and it's this. So I took all of that judgment that I had about myself, the unworthy of love, not being chosen, difficult to love. I had all these different beliefs. And then I just
threw it at
projected that all over her. So I was a very harsh and difficult parent to her.
As a daughter.
Yes. And of course, that's a very unhealthy relationship. And we didn't have, it's not like we had help. She didn't know. Her parents there's a whole story with her parents, right? And there was this dynamic within her family too, I think obviously because of the way that they were parented and all the trauma that happened in their life, of sort of like staying out of the limelight, like staying out of the line of fire. if you could just stay out of the line of fire, you could at least feel some semblance of safety for a little bit. So there was a lot of toxic blame shifting and like fire starting, and there would be like people would choose sides, and everyone would be against this one family member, and everyone would just be talking trash and digging up dirt. And then alliances would shift, and then it would be like everyone's against this person. And it was this whole thing. And growing up, when you see that, one of the things that bothered me tremendously was how poorly my mom would talk about us, myself and my brother. And I would hear her saying things, and she would even say things to my brother about me and things about me to my brother, and kind of pit us against each other and also other family members. And I hated that growing up. And I wrapped that up into like, oh, you see, she's just not a good mother. And the older I got, so mid to late high school years, I spent a lot of time with other families. So I would spend the night with friends and try not to be at home so much. And I would see these other family dynamics. And all the lens that I had was comparison of what they had that we don't. So it was always money, it was status, it was safety, it was,
Back
material things.
Mentality.
Completely. And so then I got into this whole mindset of like everyone else has this kind of mother and I don't. And now to flip that around and we think that somehow you become a parent and you're just automatically equipped to deal with all of your stuff and all the stuff of the people that you produce.
Yeah, right.
And we're just not. She had no tools for that, right? This is where her addiction just escalated and escalated, that she had to figure out a way to numb out. So not only did she have that whole childhood like that, and then all of her experiences with men that sort of compounded this idea that she wasn't good. Now she has this daughter, this like spitting image of her that walks around all day long. And whether I was saying it, which I was at times, or it was emanating out of my pores, she was not good.
This is what you were communicating, either verbally or non-verbally.
Yeah. She wasn't good enough. She wasn't doing a good enough job.
Which probably is what was going on inside of her anyways, which creates the addictions and creates all these other things.
Absolutely. So I become just this force. And, didn't know that at the time, would not have known that at the time, but still had this, even though we fought physically, lots of stories there about physically fighting. I mean, we fought verbally. There was a lot of conflict, but it was very manic, which wouldn't you know, we were both diagnosed bipolar, manic depressive. Makes total sense. We'd share medicine and all that whole stuff. And we shared a lot and we were very close. And the funny thing was, a lot of my friends at school envied my relationship with my mom because it seemed like we were so close. We were more like sisters. And at times friends. When we were friends, we were the best of friends. And when we were not being friends, we were the worst of enemies to one another. So I was, in a lot of ways, my friends would covet that perceived closeness. But all they were really
some sort of connection.
Right.
With a parent in that way.
Yeah, with a parent. And we were just deeply enmeshed and didn't know it at the time. So I think there was it was a confusing time. Teenage years are confusing anyway. Mine was deeply confusing. And so I just made her feel really, really terrible because I felt terrible. So who's at fault to that? I just don't do fault anymore. It's very easy to be like, well, she was a parent. She should have known better. No, you don't produce a child and then automatically you're endowed with all the things that you didn't get it when you were a child. So she only had the ability to pass down to me what she congruently had, which was not much for her. So all of that, fast forward to as I become an adult, right? And I start to move out of the family systems a little bit. So I'm starting, I joined the military, joined the Army on a very,
Whole other story.
it is a whole other story. It was very rash, very pride-filled, not great decision for me, but that's what I did. And then I belonged to the US and I had to go and do all of these things. And so through that time, with that distance from the system and everything, once you come out of it a little bit, it's like certain filters fall and you come out of the fog. Because what people get used to, what people would call normal, you would be amazed at what people become accustomed to.
In any relationship, not just parent-child, but in marriage,
even
or
environmental,
in friendship, or in work, or in anything.
This is why even countries who've been ravaged by war for generations, like, that's their norm. You know, we lived in South Africa. They deal with a constant threat of safety, of life and limb, like constantly. They live behind gates and walls and, you know, but life goes on.
Yeah.
They think a funny story is some of our best friends are from South Africa, and when they came to visit here and
their son,
he was like, wait, where are the gates? Where are the fences? I thought that was only in the movies. I thought it was in America. They had seen a ton of American movies, and so they knew that the houses in TV didn't live behind the gates and the fences and everything. And yet to see it in real life, like, wait, no, for real, you don't? It was just it's like, that's a foreign concept to them, where for us, it was a foreign concept to have to live behind gates and, you know, all these different things there. Your normal doesn't mean it's normal for the human system. You know, our like nervous system can be in complete dysregulation, even if that is the way we've grown up and that's our normal.
There's a universal maybe norm that our body should be in, that is right, that's in alignment, and then there becomes whatever normal environment we grow up in.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously that's a long-ish version of, you know, with leaving out a ton of details with my growing up. And so that, you know, those enmeshments and those codependencies don't just go away. And over time, she remarried a very functional alcoholic. And so her addiction escalated. She had moments at years sometimes of very lucid, clear times. Mm-hmm. And then there would be other things that would happen where she would, you know, really digress and be very deep in her addiction.
So maybe you could, obviously there's a lot of story in between you leaving home and then, you know, us getting married, and there's a whole lot of things in there of ups and downs in your relationship. But it was, you know, not estranged at that point. It was, you know, it was functional the way that it was normal for you, at least. And then we get married and, you know, there's stuff there, and then you have children. Maybe you can kind of bring us up to speed with how this estrangement started or began.
So yeah, it was when I was pregnant with our first child that these deep, deep ties of enmeshment and codependency started to rip. And I think that that's not altogether too uncommon, because at the time, and remember when I first got pregnant and everything like that, this was where my diseases really began to escalate too. And I think the fact that this kind of coincides with where the relationship with my mom went is not, I don't think that that's coincidental. Mm-hmm. So specifically, obviously, remember this, it was Thanksgiving, and we all met up in Colorado at my brother's house. And I was 7 months pregnant, I think at this time. And I had been high risk and supposed to be on bed rest and all of this stuff for this entire time. Now, something interesting about, listen, when you study through narcissism and everything like that, yes, you could easily check every box of my mom being a narcissist.
Which at some point we'll talk about
Right.
narcissism.
Our view of
Yeah,
narcissism.
it's very different than the
a little bit of a different view. Again, I just think it was a coping mechanism, like an extreme coping mechanism for her. Hey guys, thanks for joining us for this very important and sensitive topic. Obviously, this is a little bit of a longer conversation. You may or may not know, we try to keep our episodes under an hour for each episode. And because this conversation went a little bit longer, we are going to be cutting this and doing a part 2. Now, because we didn't want you to have to wait 2 weeks, because we always drop an emotional driver episode in, we are going to be dropping part 2 as a bonus episode this same week. So be looking out for part 2 of this episode coming up within a few days.
So much of this episode that's going to be coming out has so much of you talk about forgiveness, resolution. What does that really look like? What do you do now with these relationships that have been estranged? So, yeah.
See you there.